Hello, everybody. My name is Jake, and I'm a venture capitalist with Emergence Capital. And I'm here to talk to you today about why I believe that the next Salesforce.com size company will be built using an AI-enabled phenomena that we call coaching networks. Don't worry if you don't know what that word means or what that phrase means, because we made it up. I will explain it to you through the course of this conversation. So let me start by telling you a little bit about myself, some context before I dive in. I'm originally from Austin, Texas. I grew up the child of two entrepreneurs, so I was always going to do something entrepreneurial. It happened to be the venture capital side of things, but don't hold that against me. I'm a singer and a very mediocre guitar player, but perhaps most important and most relevant to this conversation, again, I'm an enterprise software-focused venture capitalist with Emergence Capital. And I've tended to focus a lot of my time on AI-enabled software applications, again, specifically focused on B2B software applications. This is a selection of some of the boards that I currently serve on of AI-enabled companies. You may recognize some of these companies. I'll talk about a few of them through the course of this conversation, but candidly, a lot of the insights that I and we at Emergence derive around the future of AI come from working closely with the founders that we back. So let me tell you quickly about Emergence, and then we'll dive in. So Emergence, for those that are unfamiliar with it, is an enterprise software-focused venture capital fund based here in Silicon Valley. The firm was started in 2004, and we've always been thesis-driven. The very first thesis that we had back in 2004, which now is obvious, is that software would move from on-premise to the cloud. And fortunately, that happened, which is why I have a job. So the first bet that the fund made was in Salesforce.com. It was a fortunate first bet. It allowed us to invest in a lot of the early horizontal SaaS applications, some of which you see behind me. The second big thesis was what we call industry cloud or vertical SaaS. This is the thesis that you can build even better software instead of focusing horizontally across a variety of industries if you focus narrowly, building software for one use case. And Viva Systems is kind of the poster child for that thesis. That company raised $6 million total, and it's now a $15 billion public company. So we are big believers in focus, which I'll talk about how it applies to AI in a moment. Some of the other more recent theses that we've worked on, collaboration in the enterprise, Yammer and Zoom are some of the companies we get to work with. Deskless workforce, mobile enterprise, another big focus for us, and you can see some of the billion-dollar outcomes on the left there. But the reason we're all here is not to talk about that. It's to talk about what's coming. And what is coming, we believe the next big arrow to create a billion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar company in enterprise software will be powered by something that we call coaching networks. So you can see here, there is no billion-dollar logo to the left of coaching networks just yet. I'll tell you about some companies that we hope will become those billion-dollar companies. But first, I'll tell you a bit about what sort of coaching networks is. So I want to start by telling you why I personally was inspired to care about coaching networks, and really artificial intelligence in the first place. And it started in an unlikely place. So I, like many of you, I assume, although perhaps not, was shocked when this man was elected to be our president. I spent a lot of time reflecting on the election of Mr. Trump, and I came to believe that I and the broader AI community bear some responsibility for the election of this man. So that probably is shocking to you, and you may disagree with me, so hear me out in terms of the explanation. I'm going to start by explaining it with a post-election chart that shocked me when I first read it. So this chart depicts county-level election results, and it buckets it by two categories. First is level of unemployment in the county, and the second is percentage of jobs in that county which are considered to be routine, and I'll define that in a second. As you can see above here, and obviously the Dems are blue and the Republicans are red. As you can see up here, level of unemployment in a county is not super predictive of who voted for Trump or Clinton. What was extraordinarily predictive is the percentage of jobs in the county considered to be routine. And jobs considered to be routine include things like manufacturing jobs, clerical jobs, administrative jobs, those types of things. So this got me thinking, right? If the artificial intelligence that we in this room, this conference, this valley more broadly are funding is causing the dislocation and basically the automation of these jobs, this is sort of reflected in the economic insecurity these people are feeling, and they're willing to vote for sort of an extreme option. So what do we do about that? I'm not going to stand on the stage and suggest to you that we should stop working on AI that automates jobs away. Because the reality is there's a lot of low-level tasks that likely should be done by computers and not by humans. I also, I can't stand on the stage as an investor who invests primarily in artificial intelligence and tell you that we shouldn't be funding these technologies. It would be hypocritical of me. So what can we do about that? How do we foot the concept that these technologies are driving automation, which is driving economic insecurity, which is driving the election of the gentleman on the previous slide, with the concept that we're going to continue to fund these things because that's the progress, that's the sort of history of economic progress. My belief is that one way in which we can address the massive retraining needs that will be created by this AI-driven automation is actually with artificial intelligence. So the sort of driver, the causal driver of the dislocation, I think can actually be used to help address it. And we're going to address it, at least in part, through what we call coaching networks. So let me take a stab at defining coaching networks now, and I'll go into more detail in one moment. Coaching networks are basically digital apprenticeships, which use AI to coach workers on how to do their jobs more effectively while they're doing them. Coaching networks leverage machines to capture and spread human ingenuity throughout a network of other workers. So I'll break down how this works in one moment, but not only do I think coaching networks can actually be a potential solution to the massive economic dislocation coming from AI-driven automation, I also believe this technology will build, and this is how I get paid, this is what I believe they will build. I believe they will build the next big enterprise software company. So here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to go into a bit more depth into what coaching networks are. I'm going to tell you about how you can build one, and then lastly, I'll end with why I think you should. Okay, so what are coaching networks? As I said before, they're basically digital apprenticeships that sort of coach workers on how to do their jobs better while they do them. Well, let's break that down in terms of how that works. So first, these networks use software to track how a distributed network of workers perform a specific job. What is the behavior that worker is engaging in? And then what is the outcome of that behavior? So if I'm making a sales phone call and I say a certain thing, does that sales prospect end up closing? And so the second thing the system does is identify what someone said and then which one works best in a given context. And then this is the critical coaching element to it. The third step is that they recommend in real time, and that part is very important, they recommend in real time an approach to a specific worker in a specific context on what they could do in that situation, and then close the loop and track that behavior and outcome. And then lastly, whatever happens there, so if it recommends that you respond to this sales phone call in a certain way, it understands if the deal closed, and if so, how quickly, et cetera, and then can learn from that suggestion what actually happened, the outcome, to make better recommendations to everyone else in the network. And that's what makes this thing so powerful. We'll talk about the network effects in a moment. So to put this into visualization form, there's basically this kind of virtuous loop around a coaching network. And we'll start with the gathering area here. As we talked about before, the systems use software to gather data. So let's go back to the sales phone call example. A system there could be Zoom, that listens in on phone calls through video conferencing, gathers data on what is said by each party. You could use NLP to parse that language to understand what is actually said in a more granular way. Then you move down to the bottom to understand, okay, the customer asked about this type of competitor, the sales rep responded in this way, and this was the outcome. So we learned, okay, this was the input, output, and we can pair those two things together to then coach up here the next time a different worker in that context is facing that similar situation, the coaching they're going to get is going to be based upon what's happening throughout the rest of the network. And then lastly, and this part is the most important part of all, it's the person up top. It's the human. And this, again, is a subtle distinction between why we're so excited about coaching networks versus the more AI-driven automation technologies that exist today. The idea here is, let's say a customer asks about a competitor, and the coaching software brings up a recommendation based upon what's happened countless times before. And let's say that the human who gets that recommendation makes a decision to say, actually, I'm going to try something slightly different. I'm going to tweak this phrasing, or I'm actually going to try something completely different. And let's say that works tremendously well in this specific context. Well, the software is going to pick up on that and then propagate that learning to everyone else in the network. And that's a concept we call the brilliant outlier. So the vast majority of people using a system are probably just going to take the recommendation that the system gives them. But what's so cool about coaching networks is that there will be, and the system should encourage, brilliant outliers that basically what we call mutate the system. And this is why this is honestly an inspiring thing to invest in. This is a conceptualization of artificial intelligence in the workplace that actually puts the human at the center and makes them a critical part of the whole experience. So our belief is that while most AI focused on automation is trying to remove humans, we believe that there is a role for coaching networks that aim to bring out and spread our humanity. Again, highlighting these brilliant outliers is critical, and it allows us to learn from other humans at massive scale. So again, this is the concept of kind of a machine-enabled apprenticeship model. This is just the way we used to learn one-on-one, but you can now learn at mass scale. Which brings me to a second important point around coaching networks, which is that this can exist anywhere. And this is really important when you think about sort of the geopolitical implications of this. So if you're a laid-off trucker in Kentucky, you can now participate in parts of the economy in geographies where you couldn't before because you didn't have anyone to train under. But now, as part of these sort of machine-enabled apprenticeship models, you could take a software sales job over the phone, not really know what you're doing initially, and start learning because the software is actually able to coach you at great scale. We think that has massive implications, obviously geopolitically, but also from a business perspective. It starts to harness talent that we otherwise couldn't harness. Lastly, coaching networks, we believe, will be most useful in the highest value job contexts, which again, as a VC, is the most exciting probably element of this at all, which is to mean a lot of the tasks that are human to machine, we believe will be the first ones that will be automated away by many of these people in this room. We believe that the jobs that will remain will be the more nuanced, more dynamic human-to-human jobs, because the reality is we as humans are nuanced and dynamic. The way we communicate changes over time. It's multidimensional, et cetera. So we think there will be a role for coaching networks primarily in these more kind of nuanced, higher value human-to-human conversations. So I'm going to take it from the theoretical and try to dive in a little bit more into some specific companies. And these are two companies I know well. I'm on the board of both of them, so happy to talk about either of them. So the first one is a company called Textio. Many of you may have heard of Textio. I'm seeing some nods in the audience. Textio is sort of at the vanguard, in my opinion, and obviously I'm extraordinarily biased, but it's at the vanguard in many ways of productizing AI in the enterprise. As you guys probably know, there's lots and lots of consultancies that brand themselves as software companies, AI software companies that are really actually just consultancies. Textio, I think, is one of the early leaders that's proven you can actually build off-the-shelf SaaS software that's fully AI-powered. And what they do is something they call augmented writing. And the concept here is really simple and actually really beautiful. Every time you write something in the workplace, you generally have a purpose. You're trying to persuade someone of something, to buy a product, to agree to your plan, to apply to your company, whatever it is. You have a goal. And the thesis behind Textio is that anytime you write something, you should be able to collect the outcomes in terms of what actually happened based upon your writing, and then coach people on how to write whatever that goal-oriented document is better. Augmented writing. They started in recruiting, so specifically coaching recruiters on how to write more effective job posts, because it turns out the language you use in a job post is highly predictive of who will apply to that job. So this is the UI they've built. You write your job post in Textio, and you can see inline coaching, and as I mentioned before, the in-context element of this is critical. They highlight words and phrases and tell you if you change this to this, you are X% more likely to attract the candidate that you want to attract, the target candidate that you're looking to attract. And you can see there's actually a quantitative scoring up here. You can get to 100, or you can get close to 100. I've actually never achieved that myself, which is sort of the optimal job post to attract the type of candidate that you want to attract. And critically, it is very, very nuanced and granular. So this will vary based upon the role you're looking for. You can see this is a marketing role in San Francisco. If this was an engineering role in Florida, the recommendations it would be giving you would be completely different. Part of what makes this so special is that by the virtue of using the software, every time any individual uses the software, uses it, posts, and then we get to learn who actually applied to the job, the software actually gets better for every other user on the system. And that is nirvana. That is what that's the goal that I as a VC am striving to find, is a product where by very virtue of the usage of the product gets better and better. This is a concept that we're familiar with in social networking, right? Network effects is very well known with Facebook and LinkedIn and other applications. This is not super common in B2B SaaS software. This really hasn't existed yet. And so when I say I think a Salesforce.com-like outcome can be built in enterprise software, I actually think it could be even bigger, because if you look at the market sizes, market caps of the social network effect-based businesses today, the ones I mentioned previously, are actually larger than Salesforce. And so if these companies are actually able to leverage these network effects effectively, they could be massive. And just as an example with Textio has hundreds and hundreds of customers and thousands of users. Every time an individual user in an individual company uses the software, the behavior they use and the outcome in terms of who applied is then propagated across not just everyone in their company, but literally everyone who's ever used Textio, which is a crazy concept. And there's all sorts, and we don't have time to talk about it now, but there's all sorts of data privacy things you need to build into this to make it work. There's all sorts of data architecture things you need to build in to make it work. But if you can make it work, it's nirvana. We talk about one more. Company called Guru, and they do what we call contextual coaching for customer-facing teams. And this is super cool. So let's imagine you're a support rep and you're having a conversation with a customer. There is a certain piece of knowledge you need to complete that transaction or that addressing that customer in an effective way. What Guru does, and this sort of pretends to the title that they gave the talk, is that Guru is effectively a copilot for you that sits alongside as a browser extension or inline in Slack or really wherever you're working, understands what you're doing, and then will contextually bring up the right piece of knowledge you need to complete whatever interaction that is. So as an example, this is an example of Guru on top of Zendesk. So if you're a customer support rep using Zendesk, and let's say our site is down, very, very bad. Guru recognizes, and this is the Guru interface on the right here, Guru recognizes, okay, this has happened. This is probably pretty urgent. And so it pops up a knowledge card, and if you double-clicked it, it would expand and give you the knowledge you need to actually complete to deal with that issue. Same thing with these tickets down here. And what's really critical is it doesn't just give you the knowledge you need, it then closes the loop. It understands, okay, did that customer support rep take this knowledge? What did they do with it, and what happened? Was the ticket closed? If so, how quickly? What was the customer NPS, et cetera, such that, again, so we can close that loop. Every time anyone else in the entire network is faced with a similar situation, Guru can more accurately recommend the right piece of knowledge to complete the task. Super, super powerful. So that's a coaching network. Those are an example of 2 coaching networks that are live and running today. So now the question of how. How can you build one? Well, as we all know, and I'm sure you've heard throughout this conference, AI companies are really just as good as their data. So it's all about the data, just like every other conversation you've had here. And so for a long time as a VC, I would just say that, go find awesome sets of data. And what I'd hear from founders is I don't know how to do that. Google obviously has lots of data. These big companies are already sitting on top of mines of data. But if I'm just a random person who has an idea for a business and I want to build an AI-enabled coaching network, how do I start that? So we spent a bunch of time trying to codify the hacks that we've seen be successful to solve the cold start problem, to go from nothing, to actually slowly building a data set, to eventually getting to the nirvana that is this sort of coaching network that has a compounding effect. So I'm going to walk you through a few of the data hacks right now. This is probably the most practical part of the talk. Hopefully it's useful. I should also warn you, I was a consultant when I first started out of school, and so I really love 2x2s. So every time I have a framework, it's going to be in a 2x2. So you'll just have to deal with that. So let me just explain to you the 2x2 to begin with. So on the bottom axis, you've got non-proprietary hacks. On the top axis, you've got proprietary data hacks or proprietary data. On the left, and the x-axis is perhaps the most interesting one. And what I'm arguing here is that there are certain types of hacks that are aggregation hacks, that are taking existing data sets and trying to basically smash them together to create new data on one end. On the other end, you've got creation hacks. So this is de novo creation of data that may not have existed before at all. So I'll walk you through each of these, but let me orient you with our North Star. In the top right, we've got coaching networks. And the concept here, again, is that once you kind of get into that land, you have this compounding effect where you're constantly creating new data. Every time someone uses your product, that's data creation. Right? That's data exhaust that's actually making the product better and better. And so that is, by definition, proprietary creation of data. And again, that's nirvana. But you can't start there. Right? You don't start with a network of humans that are using your product. You got to start somewhere. So where do you start? I'll walk you around the 2x2. So aggregation hacks that are non-proprietary, a really good example of that's just scraping. Like just going on the website, scraping a bunch of stuff. Anyone can do it. Not hard to do, but it is one way to start to amass a relatively large amount of data. Second type of aggregation hack would be partnering. This is kind of BD stuff. So this would be if you go to a larger company that already has a bunch of data, you do some sort of business development deal with that company to say, hey, if you give me all of your data, in exchange, I will give you a rev share, or I will give you free services, or I will give you some IP share. I guess for the record, from a VC's perspective, when I'm talking to my founders, I strongly recommend the middle of those three options. I think the rev share approach and the IP share approach in particular is very, very tricky. Giving people in-kind services for free is a really effective way to get data to begin with. Bottom right, creation non-proprietary. This is Mechanical Turk. Right? This is just giving someone a data set of a bunch of pictures and telling them to label it, and the labels themselves are the creation of new data. And then top right, which again is getting closer to Nirvana, when you're creating proprietary data for the first time, you've got things like data cooperatives where you're actually sharing data into a common pool to make joins and make the data sets better. You've got sensors, which you're deploying in the physical environment or the digital environment, which can be hard to build and hard to build at a large scale, but that is proprietary creation. And then you've got workflow first. And workflow first is both my favorite and my least favorite of these hacks. Workflow first is basically saying, I'm already a SaaS software company. I already provide service X. And by doing so, by providing the service, I'm collecting this data. I'm not doing anything with it right now. I'm not coaching anyone with it. But by just providing the service, I get to collect all this data. And at the end of it, I get a big treasure trove of data. That's exciting, right? In many ways, that's what Salesforce.com is trying to do now. I'm not sure if they've spoken here yet, but the concept of Einstein, Salesforce Einstein, is basically to say, we've been providing a workflow-based CRM solution and other solutions for over a decade. We've collected a ton of data, and now we want to do stuff with that data. They want to coach with that data. It's really hard to do it once you've been doing something else for 12, 15, 20 years. It's not just really hard from a technical perspective. It's really hard from a legal perspective. You actually have to change the contracts, everything else. It is possible. In fact, Guru started as a workflow-first company providing a knowledge management system and has blossomed into a coaching networks company. So it is possible to do if you are thoughtful about your data architecture strategy from the beginning, thoughtful about your legal architecture strategy from the beginning, and as well as your product strategy. So it's possible, and you get the benefits of building a nice, healthy SaaS business before you actually have to do all these data hacks that can be expensive. But I've also seen more companies than not try it and then fail and basically get stuck in workflow land. So this is an example of, or these are a series of hacks that I've seen used to varying degrees of success. Let me just I'll walk you through the Textio example since we already talked about it in terms of how Kieran, the CEO there, started from nothing and how she got to coaching networks. I described what she's doing today. I'll talk you through her journey because it may be helpful if some of you think about your own. So Kieran started knowing that she wanted to do this big thing called augmented writing. She wanted to start with recruiting. She wanted to start with job posts, but she had no job posts. So she scraped. She went to job boards, and she just scraped a bunch of job posts. She scraped millions and millions of jobs, actually, which is great, but that's only half of the data set, right? So she got a bunch of job posts, which had a bunch of information on, obviously, what was included in the job posts. She had nothing in terms of who applied to the job. And as all of you know, unless you can close the loop with AI, it's not super valuable. So how would she get the outcomes data? This is where heuristics come in. So she came up with a super, super simple heuristic, which was to say, the amount of time the job post was up is inversely correlated with the quality of that job post, which is super basic, right? Meaning if the job post was only up for a couple days, it was a really good job post because the job got filled. It was up for 2 years, it was really bad because it was never filled. There's all sorts of reasons that are obvious why that's not a perfect heuristic. But it was enough to earn her the right to move to the top left quadrant. It was enough to earn her the right to go to the partnering section and be able to go to a number of large companies that have thousands and thousands of jobs that they posted over history and say to them, hey, I will optimize your job posts for free if you give me all of your historical hiring data, your job posts and the outcomes. She did that with a handful of customers for about 6 months. And by the end of that process, her algorithm got really, really good. It got good enough, in fact, that she could start charging for it. And once she started charging for it, that is when she moved into Nirvana land, meaning she became a coaching network. So every time any new customer signed up and anytime any new user used the system, that data got fed back into the system and made coaching recommendations for everyone else in that network. And that's where she is today. So I think the company's now 3 years old, maybe 3.5 years old. She now has 370 million job posts tied to job outcomes. We believe that is by far the largest data trove of that type in the entire world, and would mean that even if Google tomorrow tried to go after us with a similar approach, we think it would be really hard for them to do because we own the data, and it's not static. The data set is constantly refreshing by very virtue of the usage of the product. That is so powerful. I would love to fund more companies just like that. OK, so what are a few quick tips to building great coaching networks companies? So first, you got to try to apply it to healthcare, and then they're going to do it in trucking, and then they're going to do it in banking and whatever. Those companies are very unlikely to become products. They're very likely to become consulting firms. So start narrow first just because it's a better business model. The other reason to start narrow is that the data itself is more relevant if you are narrow. Right? If Kieran, the CEO of Textio, had tried to do what she's doing across a whole variety of, from job posts to sales emails to marketing emails to whatever, all at the beginning, the data she'd have would be big, but it wouldn't be useful. And so the concept we describe here is we much prefer deep data to big data. So be focused. You can always expand after you're focused. The second concept is, and I'm borrowing, I realize this speech is versioned a little bit on the political. I'm borrowing a bit from James Carville during the original Clinton campaign. It's the data stupid, not the economy stupid, meaning focus less on how proprietary your algorithms are. Right next door, you've got the Google folks talking about all the various infrastructure they're building to help you develop these algorithms, which is cool, but they're also letting everyone else use those pieces of software to develop those algorithms. And so we don't actually believe that algorithms are long-term defensible. So if you came in to pitch me and said, I've got this awesome business, and I think the secret sauce is my algo, I would say, thanks, but we're not interested. However, if you came to me and said, I've got this super clever data hack that I've been using for the past 6 months, and I moved from this quadrant to this quadrant, I'm doing this kind of stuff, and here's my line of sight to the nirvana zone on the top right, I'm interested. The data is what matters. And then lastly, and this is something you probably haven't heard from other people at this conference, I would assume, the UI is arguably on par with importance to the data. And the reason that's the case is because the UI is what brings you the data over time. So if you have a coaching product that is constantly popping up, how many of you guys remember Microsoft Clippy from back in the day? Yeah, I see a lot of hands. That was not the best product, right? It was a coaching product, but the UI, first of all, was a little silly. It was hard to take seriously, and the recommendations it made weren't good, partially because it wasn't a closed loop, it wasn't really AI driven, it was a rules engine, but also because the UI itself wasn't good. The coaching wasn't timed well. The interventions didn't present themselves in such a way that someone actually wanted to use them. So to be a really effective coaching networks company, you got to figure out a way to coach people in a way that they use the coaching. Because by virtue of using the coaching, that's what creates the new data, which creates the virtuous loop. So if you are a super technical, you understand machine learning, you got a PhD in it, and you want to start a company, that's awesome. Go hire yourself a UI person as one of your first hires. It's counterintuitive, but important. OK, so that's how. I'm going to end with why, and then we'll open up for questions. So why should you build one of these companies? I hope it's fairly obvious. I realize this part of the presentation maybe hopefully is superfluous as to why I'm so excited about this. As I said before, my belief is that the next Salesforce-sized companies will be built using this phenomenon we call coaching networks. And there's two real reasons why, as a cold-blooded venture capitalist, I'm super excited about the value these companies create. The first is pricing leverage. So if you think about Textio as an example, Textio now has amassed this big data set, this very, very large data set, I should say deep data set. And at this point, there's really no one in the world that can compete in terms of the recommendations they're able to make. And what does that give you? Pricing power. Tremendous pricing power, because it's not like some other workflow SaaS solution where it's like, oh yeah, I can just go to this person because this person's software, it's basically the same. I can do this quick hack and I'll make it the same. No. The recommendations are so unique because we have a proprietary data set that's constantly self-renewing. And as a result, we get to charge a crazy amount of money for this product because we're adding a crazy amount of value, and we're the only ones that are doing it. So just to give you guys some basis in this, Mark Benioff at Salesforce kind of helped to pioneer the seat-based pricing model in software. And the average plus or minus cost for a Salesforce seat is about $100 a user a year. So that's for the horizontal software. The vertical software that I talked about before, the industry cloud-focused software like Viva, which is a pharmaceutical product, or it's a CRM focused on the pharmaceutical space, and now it's much more, they charge 2 to 3 times that, so $200 to $300 per user per year. We believe that coaching networks companies, we're going to get to 1,000. Again, because no one else can really do it, and the value they're creating is so high. Now, this is also, I don't have time to talk about in this conversation, but I actually believe that the end state for coaching networks, and actually more broadly ML-driven enterprise software, is not per seat-based pricing. I think that has negative effects because it disincentivizes utilization and usage, and basically the value of these products isn't getting as much utilization as possible. So I'll bookmark that. Happy to talk about that afterwards. But the pricing leverage is the first reason why I, as a VC, am excited about these companies. The second and most important reason why I'm most excited about these companies is, and you're probably wondering what this graphic has been behind me this whole time, the competitive moat. We are in an era of SaaS software that you could call the great commoditization. Right? SaaS software is getting to a point now where if you're developing a new CRM and yours has a slightly different color and slightly different configuration and what have you than the next person's, that distinction is de minimis. Our friends at Google and Amazon and Microsoft and other places are making it so cheap to develop software that anyone can build workflow software at this point. So how do you differentiate yourself? How do you distinguish yourself from your competitors? Well, it's a data-driven competitive moat. And it's not just, and this is where most of the companies I fall down that talk to me fall down, which is they say, look, I've got this awesome data set. It's proprietary, so you should fund me. And my response is that data set dynamic? It's not enough for you to come with this cool data set that you hacked together or that you did some BD deal with this big company and then you can build this algo. If it's not dynamic in the sense that the utilization of the product is constantly building better and better recommendations into the product, then you're going to get beat. But if you build a coaching networks company the way that I've described, you have the ability to build a moat that would be really, really hard to assail. So that's it. So I'll just end by saying, and I hope some of you in the audience are entrepreneurs, given what I do for a living. The question is, where will you focus to build your coaching network? And that focus word is probably the most important word in this sentence. Again, if you were to leave with kind of one concept today around how would you want to build something like this, it would be slice off a narrow chunk of the world. And this is going to be counterintuitive to the advice you get from most venture capitalists. Most venture capitalists want to see a market size that's multi-billion dollars from the get-go. That's actually not what we're looking for. We're looking for someone who's bit off a narrow but very high-value part of the world and then has line of sight to do something we call layering the cake to expand that market size over time. That's exactly what Kieran at Textio is doing and what Rick at Guru has done as well. So let me end it there and see if you guys have any questions. I think there's mics on either side, so feel free to come up with any questions. We get some water while you're walking. Yeah.
Hi. Very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
One concern that I've heard about these kinds of models, like what Textio is doing, is how much of the learning that you're doing with the data set is truly applicable to every partner,
Yep.
right, or every client, versus learning very company-specific things. What do you think about that?
Thank you so much for asking that question. You're not a plant, but it feels almost as if you are. I'm going to go back to the middle word there, which is focus. And this is another reason why focus matters so much, is because if you are narrowly focused, so Textio, just as an example, job posts, if you're hiring for a manufacturing job in Illinois or you're hiring for a sales rep job in Fort Lauderdale, the structure of those job posts generally is the same. The content is different, but the structure is the same, which means you can use the same basic algorithms for completely different hiring contexts because the structure is the same. The data is really different. It's important to get the granularity difference, but this is why focus matters so much, right? If she were trying to do this for job posts and then something completely different using the same algorithm, then it wouldn't be predictive. So again, another sort of vote in favor of trying to find something that you can truly productize. Because otherwise, you will become a services company. And by services company, I mean you develop a custom algo for each individual customer, and that is death. Anyone else have a question? Yeah.
Hi. So it's a similar question in that vein.
Sure.
But so you mentioned that coaching network is most likely going to be leveraged for the very high-touch, human-to-human type of jobs.
Yeah.
But then how do you account for the very unique characteristics of an individual, like their personality that shines through in conversation, that sort of thing?
Yes. So Thank you also for that question. Part of what makes me so inspired to invest in this, I mean, honestly, like any of us, we're lucky to be able to be here. We could do whatever jobs we want. Part of the reason I've chosen to build my career doing this and invest in these types of things is because it is a fundamentally human thing, which is different than, again, what most of the kind of AI-driven automation funding has looked like. So to answer your question specifically, the whole point of coaching networks is to capture and augment the nuance of each individual human. And if the data set is large enough, the idea would be, what's your name, Tina?
Yeah.
You impressed with my vision? It's pretty good, right, from here?
Yeah.
All right. So you are a snowflake, as am I. There's no one exactly like Tina. There's no one exactly like Jake. But there are people, if you get a large enough network, that may have similarities to you that behave in a somewhat similar situation in that given context. And if you build a coaching network that's large enough, you're going to find the other Tina, and you're going to coach Tina, and she's going to coach you, or he's going to coach you. So that's about scale, like that specific question. So yes, I agree with you. If you have 10 people and they're all very nuanced, you're not going to be able to figure out how to actually do much matching. But if the scale gets large enough, there's going to be some overlap, which can be useful. More broadly, even if someone is different than you in vast majority of contexts, if there's some little nuance that you do that works really well for you, the system will recommend that to someone else. And if that's someone else will try it, and they either may have the Tina mojo or they may not have the Tina mojo. But the software will then recognize if they do have the Tina mojo and it worked, they'll continue to recommend that for that person. So the idea is this is all super iterative. And if you're making enough iterations on this, you should be able to figure out what works for Tina 2.0 or what have you.
So it's not just like sharing the recommendations with the network, it's also personalized sharing of the recommendations.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Different recommendations for different people.
Yeah, exactly. 'Cause it's different recommendations for different contexts, right? So like if I'm on a call with a customer and the customer asks me a question about a competitor, and it turns out I've been talking 80% of the phone call, the recommendation the system's going to give me to answer that question is probably different than if I've been talking for 20% of the phone call. So that's why that context, remember before I had that phrase, contextual coaching, the context in terms of how you're actually behaving, that's what really matters.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Oh, no, we got one more. Come on up. You can shout, I can hear you.
So with a system like this, how do you push buy-in to the users of the results of the coaching? Because you might end up with a room that's 80% of people who think they're the brilliant outlier.
Yes. Oh, man, that's such a good question. I feel like you guys were pre-wired with these questions. That is what differentiates good from great in coaching networks. So if you can figure out how, and this is back to the UI question, if you can figure out how to make your UI convince the end user that their mutation matters, that they should try to experiment a little bit, because the reality is, like, if their mutation works really well and then it gets spread across everyone else in the network, they're going to be more incentivized to try to do it. So one like kind of silly example that's not perfect, but think about Waze and the UI in Waze. So when you do something, you have your little car and you see all the weird like ghost-like animations around it, their behaviors are actually, you can see their behaviors, and therefore you know that they can see your behaviors, and so you're more likely to engage in mutation because you know that your behaviors actually impact other people. And so really good UIs and coaching networks convince the end user that, like, hey, what you do matters. Like, that you're not operating in a complete vacuum. You're actually operating not just around the people that are sitting around you or even in your company, but actually you're part of this massive network, and you individually matter. You should try a new thing, and if it works, we're going to tell you how well it's worked, and that like 75,000 other people across the world actually tried the Aaron nuance, right? They all tried this little thing that you did, and it worked really well for you, and you actually changed the whole game. This company, Drishti, that we funded, I didn't have a chance to talk to, does this in manufacturing. So it has cameras that look at what workers are doing on an individual manufacturing line and understands, okay, this person tightened this screw first and did this thing differently second, and what have you. And it learns that, like, when Aaron assembled this device in this slightly different way in this slightly different context, he actually did it 7% faster than anyone else had ever done it. And then it takes that and then tries to spread that learning to everyone else in the network across all the lines, across everyone in the world. And the key is to tell Aaron, the original mutator, what he did, his impact. Which is, again, what makes this thing so powerful, because it is fundamentally human. Cool. Thank you, Aaron. And I realize I have 2 seconds left. Thank you guys so much for coming and listening to me talk at you.